Hello and welcome to the Responsive Family Sleep Podcast. I'm your host, Kim Hawley, holistic sleep coach, lactation consultant, peaceful parenting educator, and mom. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by all the conflicting sleep info, frustrated with sleep information that just plain felt wrong, or searched desperately for a truly gentle and responsive sleep approach, then you are in the right place. In each episode, we'll be answering your most pressing baby and toddler sleep questions, busting those sleep myths, and helping you understand truly developmental, biologically normal baby and toddler sleep, plus encouraging you to trust your intuition along the way. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today we are talking about sleep information, strategies, and advice, and how much of it is really one size fits all and why that's a problem, right? Why we need to stop with the one size fits all sleep information and actually start having nuanced conversations about sleep. Now, I hear this all the time from parents, right? They're striving for the perfect nap schedule, the perfect feeding schedule, the perfect amount of wakes, right? That it's like, it's okay, or the books or the Instagram or the social media or the TikTok or whatever. The pediatrician says my baby needs, 2-hour-long naps, or to get exactly X amount of sleep overnight, or to be awake exactly X amount of time. And so we get these really precise guidelines around sleep information that assume that all babies are the same, right? Or we could think of it from the strategy angle, right? That we want to change something and it's like, well, everyone should be able to habit stack and gradually shift whatever it is that we're changing, right? What other sleep soothing tool? Or from more of the sleep training world, right? Everybody should respond to a controlled crying or whatever fancy term, the sleep coach is using that sounds more gentle, but is usually really some variation of that. And we should have babies that just react the same. And if they don't, then clearly it's something that parent is doing wrong, is often how it's framed. But let's be real, right? Our babies are tiny humans, right? They're not robots. They don't all have the same needs. They aren't all replicas of each other. They are their own individual, but also they have the genetic component of their biological parents. And so they're unique and their needs are unique. And so when we're thinking about the sleep information we get, so much of what we hear is this really narrow, every baby should feed this many times a day, right? And for this much amount of time and this many ounces. And, it should look really similar from baby to baby. And the reality is, of course, that there's such a wide range of normal. And there's so many factors that shape how your baby reacts to different sleep ideas and what your baby needs to sleep well. And that's not, that part of the conversation isn't actually what we're going to focus on today. But I do want to give you some food for thought about all the different pieces that make your baby need individualized sleep advice. And needing individual sleep advice is kind of inconvenient, right? Because your pediatrician can't just say, oh, go do Ferber, go sleep train your baby, or why aren't they sleeping 12 hours, right? Why aren't they doing 7 to 7, or just nap them longer or nap them shorter? They can't just hand out advice without talking to you when we need to have nuanced conversations, because that takes time. So it's inconvenient to give out nuanced sleep advice because whatever professional it is needs to actually ask you questions and needs to look at the whole picture. And, we're not really set up for that, unfortunately, in our systems very well. So what are some of these pieces that make a difference, right? Well, number one is how much sleep does your baby need, right? Are they high sleep needs or low sleep needs, or are they kind of average sleep needs? A lot of the apps that my clients share the sleep information, I refuse to look at them because they drive me crazy and I can't stand the readouts. But a lot of the apps tend on the high end, actually, of typical sleep ranges. So they're telling me, well, this app says my baby needs 15 hours. And I'm like, 15 hours is like the top of the typical range. So sure, if you have a high sleep needs baby, 15 hours could be appropriate. But like that's not actually average, right? And so certainly if you have a low sleep needs baby and your app is saying they need 14 to 15 hours, but they really need like 12, I'm sure you can imagine how frustrating that's going to be for you and for baby and how that can make sleep really, really hard. So how much sleep your baby needs, wide range of normal, and we can't change that about our baby. That's just is what it is. There's, genetic components to that. It can be kind of fun to look at you and your partner, assuming that you're both genetically related to your baby, and see if you see some of the traits in yourselves that you're noticing in your baby. Sometimes we'll do this when I'm working with a family, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, my partner is a terrible sleeper, or my mother or my mother-in-law said when I was a baby, when my partner was a baby, we did X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, yeah, some of these things are genetic. Not always, right? It's not as straightforward always, but so there's how much sleep a baby needs, or a toddler needs, or a child needs. And then there's things like how sensitive to their environment are they, or what other sensory needs that they have that set them up well for sleep, like that help them feel good in their body and be able to relax, disengage from the world around them, let go, and relax into sleep. And that's really different from person to person, especially if you have a little who's really highly sensitive to their environment versus one who's not. We're going to get really different things that they need. And some decisions might not make sense for one kid versus another kid, right? So my son, once he's asleep, he can sleep through a lot. It's hard to wake him up. He's a pretty sound sleeper. And once he got over, the first couple years of being a more wakeful baby and toddler, that was true. And I mean, I guess it was probably true when he was a baby. I just wasn't thinking about it that way. Like he woke up when he woke up. It's not like we necessarily were waking him up all the time. So we were doing a family bed when my daughter was born, and I was not really concerned at all that she, as a newborn, might wake him up, right? Because he sleeps through everything, right? Except once when he was like 3 and he was asleep on the couch in the evening and we made chocolate chip cookies. And as soon as they came out of the oven, that child was awake and he was like, where are the cookies? I'm like, oh my God, kid, you have like a sixth sense. But anyway, in general, you can sleep through anything. Were I talking with a client that had a kiddo who was really sensitive and seemed to be bothered by small noises in their environment, and they're welcoming a new baby, right? He would not probably choose to keep the kiddo in the same room if they were bed sharing, right? Or had a floor bed in their room, because the odds of them having to pivot at the last minute would be really high, right? Versus the odds of me having to pivot at the last minute with my kiddo were really low. They were there. It could have happened, but they were pretty low. And you can take that in a lot of different directions too, right? The kids that are, and babies that are bothered by sounds in the house, or like my cat is lurking around here while I'm recording this podcast, and maybe you hear the bell in her collar because I didn't manage to kick her out of this room. Some babies are really sensitive to small things in their environment that you're like, why are you not habituating to that, right? Most people would habituate to that. And some kiddos, nothing seems to faze them. So we have like the amount of sleep that you need. We have your sensitivity to things that might make it harder for you to fall asleep. We have the things that you need to have your body be ready to relax into sleep. So, do you need deep pressure? Do you need a lot of activity? Do you need a lot of rhythmic movement? What are those things that help you be ready for sleep, or help your baby or your toddler be ready for sleep? What level of touch do you need? And then we have kind of our broader temperament traits, right? That really, really shape sleep, right? I don't think I've done an episode solely on temperament. I really should. But temperament, right? It's genetic. And yet we can't change it, right? It's genetic. We just got to work with it and understand it. And it's really going to shape our sleep journey. I would say arguably it's one of the largest influences on our sleep journey, aside from perhaps big underlying medical challenges, health challenges. And so things like persistence, right? Or body rhythmicity, meaning like, does your body easily fall into a regular pattern of feeding, sleep, and elimination? Or does it not, right? Do we get on a good sleep schedule easily, or are we always kind of feel like we're all over the place? Persistence and intensity. These are all pieces of temperament, and they absolutely shape our sleep and what we need to do to get good sleep. And so, I'm sure there's more. That's not really an exhaustive list by any means, but you can see how we have all these different pieces, different temperament, different sensory needs, different sensory sensitivities, different sleep needs, right? Like all that is going to come together, different family preferences, different family patterns. All this is going to come together, and there is no one piece of information that's going to be true and correct and accurate for everybody. And even when I am sharing information with the family, right? Maybe we're talking about nap hygiene, right? Like nap environments. And I'm saying, okay, let's have naps in natural light. That's generally my go-to. Naps in natural light. But maybe they've been napping their kiddo in the dark because their kiddo is very visually sensitive, right? They're very easily stimulated by visual input. Okay. So we try napping in the light and their kiddo just cannot fall asleep. So while, yes, broadly speaking, I do recommend napping in the light at all ages, this is a kiddo that doesn't need a nap in the light, or we need to play around with that, right? Maybe we have the lights off while they fall asleep and then turn the lights back on or open the curtains after they're asleep and see if that works, or try a dim light instead of complete dark, right? There's lots of ways you can play with that depending on what works for the child. But you can see even within, a recommendation that I feel like, okay, well, we want to be in the light during the day. That's really good for our circadian rhythm, all that great stuff. We don't want to spend a ton of time in the dark during the day. That's not great for our circadian rhythm. Even with it, that's all true. But we still have to think about the kiddo in front of us. And that's where we need those nuanced conversations, right? And where there's very few things that are absolute. This is going to work for every single solitary baby. So next time you hear sleep information, whether it's from like an authority figure, like a therapist or a pediatrician or some other professional who's totally escaping me right now, or it's on social media, or an app, or your mother-in-law, your sister, your best friend, whatever. The next time you hear some sleep information that's very like, this is the way, every baby has to do that, I think it's really important to pause and ask yourself some questions, or ask the other person some questions. But really, it's like, does this make sense for my baby? Like, does this fit what I know about them? Does this make sense for what I'm noticing about their sleep needs or their sensory preferences or their temperament, right? And if we're talking about sleep strategies, is it kind, right? Does the way that it supposedly improves sleep make sense? Is there an alternative? And almost always is, right? So, and like, does it feel right? And so we really want to kind of have that gut check, looking at our baby, not the books, not like any like fear-based messaging from the greater professional world, but really just like, hey, does this make sense? And even simple things like, your baby should sleep 7 to 7, 12 hours overnight. Like, most people don't think of that as like sleep training related or unresponsive, but it's just, it's not actually evidence-based. First of all, that's not how most babies are going to sleep. And so it's not going to fit most babies, right? And it's being presented as though it should. So there's a good opportunity to be like, is that really what the research says? First of all. And does that really make sense for my baby? Like, what if we played around with how long we created our nighttime? Would that affect their sleep, right? So I feel like I'm rambling a bit here. So we're going to reel myself in. And the sum of this episode is there is no one-size-fits-all sleep information. It is so nuanced, and your baby is an individual. And so when we hear information that's presented like one-size-fits-all, or blanket truths, or it's this way or else all these dire things are going to happen, it's a really good time to take a deep breath, center yourself, and get curious. Ask questions, whether those questions are of yourself or of the other person, and know that you can always walk away, dismiss that info, and go look at another source. So I hope you found this helpful, and I'm here if you want those nuanced conversations and understanding about your baby's sleep. Thank you for joining me today. I hope this episode left you feeling more informed, confident, and encouraged on your sleep journey. And just a reminder before you go that nothing in this episode is individualized to your specific sleep situation, nor is it to be taken as medical advice. Take what resonates, ignore what doesn't, and check with your healthcare provider about any medical concerns. Take a moment to subscribe to this podcast so that you'll never miss an episode. And take a moment to rate, review, or share an episode you love on social media. All of that helps parents just like you find me, this podcast, and this gentle and responsive sleep information. I'll see you next time.